After doing a bunch of research, I decided that a military surplus generator would be the best option to power my entire house. Not only are these cheap, but they're extremely reliable. Plus, diesel is frankly the best fuel, which I'll explain later. I bought this generator at a GovPlanet auction several months ago, and it's time to unload it from my truck. In this video, we're going to go through this generator mechanically to make sure it will work reliably. I'm also going to hook it up to power my whole house. Now, I do plan on using this generator as an automatic standby generator, where it'll start up automatically when there's a power outage to power my whole house. However, due to the complexities involved there, I may do a part 2 video on that. Now, the model of this generator is an MEP 803A. If you're looking to buy one of these generators, be very careful because there are some pitfalls, especially when you get into the larger capacity generators. Many of them are 3-phase only, and many of them operate at 400 hertz. If you're going to power a house in the US, you need a 240 volt generator that operates on single phase and 60 hertz. Now, the auction listing claims this generator operates. It has an indicated 535 hours, which is very low, and it's rated for 10 kilowatts of power, single phase or 3-phase. Now, as far as I know, the only thing wrong with this unit is it has a little bit of cosmetic damage to the top of the housing. That's probably why I got it so cheaply. I think I can probably just bang this out with a hammer and throw some new paint on it, and it's totally fine. When I was researching these, I saw these regularly sell for about $5,000 to $6,000. This one I got for $3,600. That's a heck of a deal. We just open this thing up and take a look inside. I mean, it is a beautiful 4-cylinder diesel engine. The engine's made by Onan, I believe, but it's painted the color of a Detroit diesel. Naturally, we have a battery tray. That is empty. There's no battery in it. The oil filter says it was replaced at 533 hours. I think that was 2 hours of runtime ago. It's May of 2021. I mean, it looks pretty good in here. It's clean. Everything's easy to access. This thing's going to be great. Over here on the other side, this one might be a little tricky to open. We got another empty battery tray on this side. These are 24 volt units, so they take 2 batteries. The coolant expansion tank has coolant in it. That's good. Antifreeze tested November of 2015. Gonna want to replace that. So this plaque here says this engine was overhauled in 2013. They put standard main and rod bearings in it, and it looks like they rebored it to plus 40 thousandths of an inch. So I'm guessing it's 535 hours on the rebuild. Over here I have the control panel. I love it. It's got tons of gauges. It's got indicator lamps to tell you if something's wrong. This is fantastic. So these are the output terminals, essentially where I'm going to hook my house up to the generator. But first, I need to pour a concrete slab, which is challenging in cold weather. The concrete cannot be allowed to freeze until it reaches at least 500 psi of compressive strength, which is likely to take a couple days at these ambient temperatures. Alright, well that didn't turn out too badly. Looks pretty good. So we have a temperature of about 63 degrees on the surface. The ground is like 37 degrees. The snow, 30 degrees. 2 days later, I had covered the concrete with a blanket and some plastic sheeting to keep it warm, and here are the results. The temperature of it's a good 54 degrees, and the ground is 46 degrees. And with the slab ready, it's time to move the generator onto the slab with my excavator that's frankly older than I am. I mean, would you just look at that? That is a sight to behold. As you can see, I am not cheaping out on batteries because I want this thing to start. All right, we've got power. Okay, let's just make sure this thing has oil and we'll start it up. It's got oil and it actually looks pretty good too. With that said, it's at least a couple years old, so I am going to change it, but Not before I start it up. Temperature right now, 27 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm gonna put it on preheat for a good, it says 30 seconds. It's quite cold out, so this is gonna use all the glow plug preheating it can get. I'm not actually counting, but that's probably good enough. All right. We've got good oil pressure. Whew, that thing is sweet. Yeah, it runs great. Okay, first things first, let's do an oil change. If I just open up this valve, it should drain out. Should drain out. Oh my God, it's draining out real slow. Oh my goodness, I should have run it for longer. This is some thick oil in there. I think it's safe to say this is not the right grade oil for these weather conditions. In fact, this oil is so thick, I'm genuinely wondering if someone put gear oil in the engine. While I'm waiting for that oil to drain, there's a really convenient coolant drain tube here. Back here, there's a valve to turn, and the coolant drains right out. Okay, this is taking way too long. It's getting dark and colder out, so I set up a heater here to try to warm up the engine block, and hopefully that will make it drain faster. Well, it looks like that's about all I'm gonna get out of it. It takes 5.9 quarts, so that's probably pretty close to all of it. Next time what I'm gonna do is run the engine to get the oil warm, and then it should drain out a lot faster. I know this filter probably doesn't have to be changed, but I'm gonna do it anyway to be thorough. New filter, we got a Wix. Oh, the old filter is a Champ. It does say made in USA, so it can't be that bad. The oil I'm using is Shell Rotella T6. It's a 10W30, which is approximately the correct temperature range for this application, since the generator is mostly going to be run in the winter, and it is a full synthetic. Oil level looks okay. We'll check it again after I run it. For coolant, I'm using this Zerex heavy-duty extended life coolant, and the advantages of this over the green coolant are twofold. Number one, it has an extended life, 10 years it says, and number two, it has an additive that helps protect against cavitation, which is nice for diesel engines. Because this is concentrate, I've already gone and mixed it up in these jugs here with distilled water. This looks suspiciously like Truck Stop lemonade. Oh, we're overflowing. Okay, it's full. So I filled up the radiator, the coolant expansion tank is full to the cold level, so the correct thing to do now is to run this, get it up to temperature, and then I can double check the coolant level and make sure it's good. I really should have done this before I ran it initially, but I'm gonna check the water separator here for any water or crap in the fuel. Nothing is coming out. You know, it's also possible that the fuel that's in this is not winter fuel, so it could be gelled up because it's pretty cold out right now. Okay, it's 25 degrees outside. I'm gonna give these glow plugs a good 30 seconds to run here. Got oil pressure. All right, well, it started up a lot faster that time. Okay, I feel like we might have some cooling system issues. First, this gauge has been pegged down here, so this gauge does not work. I don't know if it's the gauge, the wiring, or the sensor, but I'm gonna have to dig into it and figure it out. The engine's been off for a little bit. I'm getting about 160 degrees over here. There are two sensors here, and I'm not sure which one is the temperature sensor. There's a 1-wire, and then there's a 2-wire sensor. First thing to check is in here. I think this is just as simple as opening it up. Look at that. Let's see. Coolant temp gauge is this one right here. It's got a bunch of wires to it. It's hooked up, and everything looks fine. Oh, this switch right here. Currently, it's set for 3-phase. If I switch it over here, That puts it on 120/240 volts single phase, because that's what I'm going to need for my house. 5 wires going to this gauge here, so I'm going to need to get out the electrical diagrams and sort this out. Okay, so even though there are 5 wires, there really are only 3 terminals that I need to concern myself with. So we have the ground here, this is power, 24 volts, and this is the signal from the sensor. First thing I need to do is turn the power on. So first thing I'm going to check is ground here and power, and we're getting 23 volts. That's good enough. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the resistance from the ground to the sensor, and I'm not getting any resistance. That's a problem. I should be getting some resistance there, so that's telling me there's no signal coming into the gauge. Okay, step 2 over here at the sensor. So I'm going to get one of these leads on the sensor itself, and the other one I'm going to ground somewhere like this. And I'm getting 66 ohms. I don't know if that's the correct value for this temperature, but it seems like a plausible value, so I think we're going to say the sensor is probably okay. The fact that when I tried to measure the resistance at the gauge and it said that the circuit was open suggests that there is probably a problem with this wire right here. Just as a bit of a sanity check, I have one of these probes over there on the sensor and this one here. You hear that beeping? That means that the wire is continuous and there's nothing wrong with the wire. So what's going on here? Something is fishy. Okay, let me double check this. So we got ground, we got signal, and I'm getting 70 ohms now. What is going on here? This is working correctly. Yeah, the gauge is still pegged down here, so I'm going to diagnose this as a bad gauge because I think all the inputs to the gauge are correct. While I was waiting for a new gauge to come in, I figured I'd change the air filter. This air filter looks super clean. This is replaced 533 hours. I mean, I bought a new air filter, but I am not going to replace that because that's like brand new. Next, I'll change the fuel filter and water separator. You see that? The end of this hose is plugged with ice, which is why it wasn't draining when I tried to check it for water earlier. I guess that's kind of dumb because it's below freezing, so the water's ice. That's probably a good enough reason for me to change this filter. Oh, it's on there really tight. I think this one is going to work, hopefully. Oh my God, that's so tight. So this Wix filter that I bought to replace this doesn't have this nifty drain here, so I wonder if I can swap these. It looks like they're the same threads. The only difference being that this has an O-ring seal and this does not. You know what? I don't think they are the same threads. I think they just look very similar. Yeah, no, they're similar, but they're not the same. Okay, that's fine. This is no big deal. This video would not be complete without a little bit of controversy, pre-filling my fuel filter. Okay, new fuel filter. Goes like this, right? It looks like there's a little seal in here. This seal is old and hard and messed up, so I'm really glad that I'm changing it. New seal. All right, well, there's another task that's super easy to do on this thing. Now, before I hook this up to my house, we need to do the obligatory disclaimer.
Warning, I have no idea what I'm doing. I am just a YouTuber and not a professional. If you attempt this yourself, you will certainly experience loss of life, limb, and/or property. The building inspector is likely to condemn your house. You will be exposed to risk of fire, electric shock, blunt trauma, and if you live in California, cancer. Do not try this at home.
Now, my first sort of installation note is that the generator needs to be at least 5 feet away from the house, and that's because if the generator catches on fire, hopefully the house won't also catch on fire. Second, I've dug a trench here that'll allow me to run conduit from the house to the generator at a depth of at least 18 inches as required by the National Electric Code. Now, I also have a quick note about this ground rod here, which I drove 8 feet into the ground. It's not technically required for this installation because the generator is grounded to my house all the time through my transfer switch. However, if I were to use this generator to power something else like my 3-phase Bridgeport mill, not through my house, then I would need that, or at the very least, having a ground rod is best practice. So essentially, I've done this to make my life easier in the future if I ever need it. Okay, so I need a post here to have an electrical outlet and also to have the conduit come up and the wires come out to go to the generator.
Luckily, I had some concrete left over from pouring the slab that I was able to mix up real quick. As always, for cold weather pours, I'm using warm water from the kitchen sink.
There we go, that's perfect. Close enough to close enough.
Being so far into the ground, I'm not particularly concerned about this concrete freezing before it cures.
Okay, it's time to drill into my house. I really don't like doing that, but it's got to be done. I'm going to start with this pilot bit here and we'll see where it comes out. I think I know about where it's going to come out, but... Okay, this right here is where it came out. I wanted to avoid this stud here, so that's pretty much exactly what I wanted. I'm going to start drilling on the inside of the house first, because this is easier to repair if something weird is in here. Well, unfortunately, I hit a stud over here to the right, so I'm going to have to move this over to the left by about 1/2 inch on the other side. So in order to cut a nice clean hole in this vinyl siding without tearing it up or shattering it, especially in this cold weather, you can actually run a hole saw backwards and it'll do a really good job of cutting through it. Look at that. Fantastic. Here we go. Look at that. You can see through into the other side. I love how they use plywood rather than particle board or fall particle board to build this house, so that's nice. Through this 2-inch conduit, I'm going to be running these 4 things. And first, I have this big honkin' cable right here. This is the generator power cable. It's got 3 power wires, plus a ground, plus a bunch of wires for control circuitry. I'm going to be using these in part 2 of this series so that I can use the generator as an automatic standby generator. Here I have some 3/8 fuel line. I'm going to be using this in part 2 as well. This is basically going to be so the generator has an almost endless supply of fuel. Over here, I just have a standard 4-wire cable. I'm also going to use this in part 2 of the series for some custom control circuitry. Over here, I have some fairly standard 12-2 non-metallic wire. I'm going to use this to power a 20-amp outlet by the generator. Okay, so my new water temperature gauge came in. As it turns out, there were 2 manufacturers of these military spec gauges for these generators, and neither of them are in production anymore. And I'm wondering if maybe that's why they sent this otherwise perfectly good generator off to the auction to be sold. As it turns out, you can still buy quality aftermarket gauges that will work in this application, but they're just not technically certified to military specification. Okay, so we're gonna start it up here, make sure the coolant temperature gauge works, and then also we're gonna test and make sure it's actually generating power. Over here, I have some 10-3 wire running in here that I've got hooked up. And if you're not sure which wires go where, someone was nice enough to write in Sharpie so that I would know. But if you open up this, in here it says for output of 120/240 volts, we do L1, L3, and neutral. All right, because I replaced the primary fuel filter, I'm gonna prime this for a little bit. Looks like the gauge is working. It's been running for a little bit and it shows that it's up to temperature. I'm not getting any power at these terminals. Very, very weird.
I decided to remove the top cover so I can take a look inside and see what's going on.
Well, here's a look inside the generator. The 3 main generator output wires connect to this thing right here, so that might be something to take a look at, but it's pretty complicated in here, so I think it's time to break out the wiring diagrams.
Right, wiring diagrams. Well, I identified the part in question as K1, and the key says that K1 is the AC circuit interrupter. I also noticed that there's a part called the AC circuit interrupter switch labeled S5. When I located the switch on the wiring diagram, I can see it plainly controls the AC circuit interrupter.
Well, this is that switch in question, so let's see if that fixes the issue. All right, we got 121 volts. And that gives me 243. This is perfect. Well, I feel a little bit dumb for not reading the manual on that. All right, so I got these cables protected by this nice nylon sleeve here. This will protect it from the sun and from some abrasion as well. I just got to strip down these big wires here and connect them to these lugs right here. I think I figured out the best way to strip this cable. You don't cut all the way through it, but you just make a little slice down the cable, cutting most of the way through it. The problem is you really don't want to slice into the insulation of the wires inside. This cable's very expensive, and I already ran the entire length of it, so I can't really replace it at this point, especially if I ruined the wires down there. I don't have any extra. Then you can kind of just pull it apart. That's not too difficult to do. Okay, I just got this thing stripped all the way down, and that's when I noticed that there's a string in here that you can pull, and it'll cut the insulation for you, which is the easiest way. So these are the control wires that I'll use to turn this into an automatic standby generator in part 2, but these are the 4 main conductors that I'll use to transfer the power. So technically I'm supposed to bury some of this marking tape at least 12 inches above the conduit. And the purpose of this is so that it doesn't get dug up accidentally. Now it's a little bit silly in this case because it's a short run. You can see where it goes in and where it comes out. So where do you think the conduit is? Obviously it's in the middle, but it is technically required. So I'm just gonna do it. Maybe I just tie it to this. Okay, it is time to install this 20 amp outlet over here on this post. Stripping this underground rated wire can be a pain because the insulation runs around all 3 of the conductors. See if I can use this and then pull it off. Oh yes, it worked. Never mind, that was really easy. So I guess I'm turning into a home improvement channel here, and I'm going to show you guys how to wire an electrical outlet. Start with the ground. I need to twist these two conductors. The reason why I'm doing this is because I have to ground both the box and the receptacle. A ground wire nut will go on there. Secure those together. I'm gonna make a little loop here. And on this one, I'm gonna make another little loop. Inside the box, that green screw is the ground screw. The loop should go clockwise when you install the screw on it so that when you tighten it, it doesn't make it come apart. This actually doesn't take a loop, so I'm going to cut this end off. I mean, these things are really easy. You just stick it in and tighten it up. We'll strip about that much off of this wire, and the same with the black wire. These outlets are so easy to install. You just stick it in and tighten it up. The white wire will typically have a silver colored screw, and then the black wire, there's actually usually a gold colored screw, although in this case it is black, which is nice. Okay, we got plenty of wire here, so we'll just sort of tuck this in, fold it into the box neatly. Having extra wire is nice for if you do anything in the future. You have plenty of room to cut it, strip it, do whatever you need to do to it. There we go. I should also note that I am using a water-resistant GFCI outlet out here because it is an outdoor damp environment. In fact, all of this stuff is outdoor rated. And there you go. That's how you wire an electrical outlet. And now to power that outlet, I need to hook up this end of the wire, which I already ran over here, to my circuit breaker. Now, before I start poking around in here, this is live with 240 volts, and it would be quite dangerous to work on this in that state. This is a good time to try out the utility service disconnect on my new transfer switch. Now, this is an automatic transfer switch, but I'm using it as a manual transfer switch. I will turn it into an automatic transfer switch in part 2 of this series. Okay, shutting the power off, simple as this. Great. I do have a light here next to the camera that's plugged into my UPS uninterruptible power supply, so that's why there is still some light here. Just to be extra safe, we do have 0 volts. Space number 12 here is currently for the external power outlet by my driveway, and so I'm going to replace this breaker with a dual breaker. That way it'll control both exterior outlets and it won't take up any more space in my panel. Now I just have to run this wire into the box, and I probably should run it on this side somewhere. Okay, I'm gonna use this knockout right here. Now I'm gonna run the wire through this hole, but to protect it from abrasion, I'm gonna clamp it in place with one of these clamp connectors. It's threaded right there, so you just stick it in, and then I can screw this onto it. So I'm going to strip this wire right about here. And then hooking it up is fairly straightforward. The black wire goes to the breaker itself. This is where the power comes from. The white is the neutral, and that goes to the neutral bar right here. It could also go to this one, but I'm going to do it on this side, keep it neat. And then the ground goes to one of the ground bars, which are grounded to the case of this. One thing about this panel is that the ground and the neutral are not bonded together, and that's because they are bonded together in the transfer switch, and you can't bond them in both places. For the neutral, I can just find any opening on the neutral bar.
The ground wire I hooked up to the ground bar, which is hidden behind all these wires and is therefore kind of difficult to see.
I should be able to turn power back on to the house now. Lovely. And to make sure this outlet works... Oh no. What's wrong? It's a GFCI outlet, so maybe I need to reset it. Yep. There it is. And then I really should make sure this thing is actually able to power my house, so let's try it out. It's pretty cold out. It's 30 degrees outside, so we'll preheat it. 9:30. Okay, so the voltage is good, 240 volts. The frequency right about at 60 hertz. I'm gonna go ahead and close the circuit interrupter. Now from the inside, they give you this little handle to manually switch it, which goes in here. It's insulated for 600 volts because I'm sticking this into an enclosure that is charged. Right there. Yeah, so shut off power to the house first. Okay, and now switch over to the generator. And we got power back on. Fantastic. Yeah, everything seems normal in here. Everything still looks good over here. Interestingly, it's showing that I'm only using a tiny bit of current, so I'm wondering if this gauge works. I'm gonna turn on my oven and see if I can get that power usage up. Let's go bake. Yeah, we're a little bit over 25% rated current, so that's great. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that diesel is the best fuel compared to all the other options, and there are many reasons why, but the number one reason why I chose diesel as opposed to propane or natural gas or gasoline is because of storage. Now, I have propane at my house already. I have a 125-gallon propane tank, and I started my search for generators by looking at propane generators because it would be so convenient. The generator I was looking at would use about 2 gallons of propane per hour, and these propane tanks, they don't fill them up all the way, but I would be looking at, if the tank were full, of getting about 4 days of runtime on my generator before I run out of propane. Now, if I were only half empty, I would actually get 2 days of runtime, which is not very much. So I called up my propane company and asked, hey, can I get a larger propane tank for my generator? And they said, well, they don't give out propane tanks for generator usage. I could buy one. She gave me a quote for a 500-gallon propane tank, and the price was, wait for it, $6,000. And that by itself wrote off propane as an option because that is ridiculously expensive. Now, diesel, on the other hand, because it's not a compressed gas, is much easier to store, and the tanks are a lot cheaper. I can buy a brand new home heating oil tank of 275 gallons for about $1,000, so that's already much, much cheaper. But you can actually get those tanks for free or cheaply a lot of the time. Right now, a lot of people are switching from oil heat to propane, and for that reason, you can go on Marketplace and you can find a lot of used tanks on there, and that's what I did, and I actually got a killer deal. This is the tank that I got on Marketplace for free, and it even came with about 150 gallons of home heating oil that was inside the tank. Now, the challenge was to pump the fuel out and transport it, and then also the tank was located in a basement where it was pretty tricky to get out. But if you can solve those problems, you can get a really good deal on a tank like I did. Also, this tank is only 10 years old, which means it has a lot of life left in it. A lot of the tanks on Marketplace are used, and so you do have to be concerned with leaks, but this one, I should be able to get decades more use out of it before I have to worry about that. Also, with a 275-gallon capacity, I should be able to get conservatively about 10 to 11 days of runtime out of my generator before this runs out of fuel. And that brings me to reason number 2 why diesel is better, and that is ease of transportation. Now, if I had a propane generator and I run out of propane, my only option is to wait for my propane company to come deliver more propane. Now, a lot of the time when the power goes out, it's because trees fall down on the power lines, and if the trees are down, it could very well be that they're not able to get to my house. With diesel fuel, I can bring my truck here to the gas station and fill up my 90-gallon fuel transfer tank, and it's as simple as that. If you don't have a fuel transfer tank, you can go to Tractor Supply or somewhere like that and buy one, or you could just use a smaller fuel can. I mean, diesel is very easy to transport. Reason number 3 is that diesel engines tend to be a lot more reliable and longer lasting than gas engines, whether they're gasoline, propane, or natural gas. Reason number 4, diesel also tends to be a lot more efficient than gas engines. Reason number 5 is a minor reason, but diesel tends to be safer than the other options because it's not going to explode on you. Now, there is one downside to having a diesel generator, and that is the cost. Usually they're a lot more expensive than gas generators, although when you go this route, this ends up being about the same amount of money, or at least in the same ballpark as a gas generator. And the second downside with this generator in particular is that it is not able to be used as an automatic standby generator without significant modification. And this is where we get into part 2 of this series, where my engineering background is going to really come in handy, because I'm going to do those modifications to this generator to make it an automatic standby generator. My plan is to turn this into a computer-controlled sort of smart generator so that I can write software to control it. I'll even be able to use that software to send me notifications like, hey, your generator just turned on, or it's overheating, or it's out of fuel, things like that, which could really come in handy. Anyway, if you're interested in that, stay tuned for part 2, and thank you so much for watching.